Welcome to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast, where my guests share their stories of addiction, how they recovered, and the tools and practices they use to stay sober now. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me today.
Arlena, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. I'm so excited to talk to you because we were just chatting that it's been a good 5 years since we traded interviews back in the day. Do you want to talk a little bit about who you are and your podcast and stuff?
Sure thing, Arlena. Yeah. And before we hit record, we both, gave each other updates. You've been doing some awesome things, and I'm excited to have you on my podcast later today in the same day. It's just like the day of Paul and Arlena hanging out and chatting with each other, but it's going to be good. Yeah. So it's good to be here. My name is Paul Churchill, 42 years old. I live in beautiful Bozeman, Montana for most of the year. And kind of a newer project is I now spend about 3 to 4 months in Costa Rica, AKA when it's frigid and freezing cold in Montana. But I do love the winters here as well. Um, some changes since we have last chatted is I am now a father. On June 1st of this year, I had my first baby boy. That was awesome and a total ass kicking as well. That has not stopped. Um, my sober sidekick, Ben, he's a standard poodle. He's now 12, almost 12 years old, but he is still with me. And I'm married. That happened a couple of years ago. As I mentioned, a new property in Costa Rica. I think I wrote a book since I last have was on your podcast. Our private community Cafe RE is now a nonprofit. Those are fun external things, right? And I think with
Wow.
sobriety, anything is possible. But I think some of the bigger wins has been internal, where there's just a little more inner peace. I wish the progress was more notable and faster, right? But I've just noticed there's a little more inner peace. There's definitely more patience with myself and with others. And again, having a young kiddo in the house or an infant in the house, that's the ultimate teacher in patience. But there's been an overall greater acceptance over the years that have passed without alcohol, acceptance of what life is. I know, Arlene, when I first started this alcohol free journey, and especially while podcasting, if I had a negative emotion or like a string of them or like a day or two that sucked, I always thought I was doing something wrong. And it was like a back to the drawing board type thing, a new program. I got to watch this video, that, which there's still room for that. But I've realized that shit days are just a part of living a human life. And sometimes, I mean, there's a phrase for it: you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. But what's neat is the circuitry is deepened inside of a drink won't make any of that better. Sometimes I reach for an occasional maple donut or have like an extra cup of coffee. There's like addictions light going on, but overall, as I mentioned, like there's been a wonderful expansion in my life. And I know, Arlena, on this podcast, you've said it, heard it, probably in the space, the opposite of addiction is connection. And me getting married and having a kid, like those are the pinnacle in that category. So I'm real happy with myself. I've also had to push through a shit ton of fear the last couple of years. I almost sent my wife home after 3 days of visiting me. This is like 3 or 4 years ago. I was just too nervous, couldn't handle it. But here we are. Yeah,
That's
I'm
so
happy to be here
nervous.
with you.
That's amazing. Yeah, those fears are I'd be really interested to sort of dig into. I think people think, once you get sober, then, suddenly you're free of, a lot of pain or fears or stuff. And that's not actually the case. They say that when you get sober, you feel better, but you feel fear better, you feel pain better, you feel joy better. It's like you're more connected to your actual all your feelings. So but I can't imagine what it would be like to have to wrestle with feelings while distracting or destructing with alcohol. So,
Yeah, without a doubt. Well said. I've heard it once that it's not a drinking problem, it's a sobriety problem. And like
yeah.
living life without numbing agents, without tranquilizers is a challenging. Our biological circuitry kept us alive when there were saber-toothed tigers and things like that. It worked really well. But like with a mean email or like a hater on Instagram,
Ooh.
it's hard. Like it doesn't quite match up. And I think our Western world, I'm a fan of it. I love it. I choose to see the good in things, but also I think there's a lot of unnecessary competition in roles. Like, what's the male supposed to do in a house these days? Just so much has changed. And absolutely, fear is a normal part of a human life. But I
Yeah.
know not just myself, but fear has been exacerbated in the last several decades. And I think chronic pain and inflammation is also tied to fear, just like a baseline state of fear. So, I used to use alcohol to medicate with that, and it worked really well. And then I also have tried the psychotropic route. This would be antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and now I think the breath is is like the most magical tool ever. Have not perfected it, but I try to do breath work almost every morning. And fortunately, like the circuitry in the mind, if I'm feeling squirrely, the thing that shows up is like, let's go find a calm repose and start breathing. That's it. It's not
Mhm.
like, yo, where's the nearest liquor store? King Cobra awaits. Oh my, So there's progress. There's progress of the circuitry within. There are tools within that can help me get through this. But I'll be honest with you, Arlena. I'd say 90% of my anxiety has gone away without
Wow.
alcohol, but there are some days where I'm like, wow, this is intense, but I just wait for it to pass. I think time is one of the ultimate healers. So whatever emotional front will come, I know it will go. And sometimes I just got to wait it out, which sucks, but hey, it's way better than I have a hangover the next day. Yeah.
That's so interesting that you say that, there is that saying that time heals all wounds. And I've sort of, listen, who doesn't love to be contrarian every once in a while? Right. But I would argue that the time does not heal all wounds because the pain waits, but it kind of just depends. Like if we're talking about an emotion that arises, time will heal that, that'll pass. But haven't you found that um, and I know you're somebody that actually does the work, which I really respect, right? So as you do the work, you're accessing pain that has been waiting. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think I track with you there. And you're right. Time is not the healer of all pain. I think there is a quote, I think it's Jung, the 19th century Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who said, what you resist persists. Like, time will keep going until you face your fears, and turn that gaze inward or face what's been holding you back. So, yeah, I track with that for sure.
Yeah, I think that the time differentiation thing is what's important. Like, man, I don't know about you, and I think you'll probably learn this from your son. Sometimes a snack and a nap will heal all that ails me.
Yeah, sometimes it's so simple. There's the acronym hungry, angry, lonely, tired, like HALT. And I heard
Uh-huh.
somebody add boredom and stress, like HALT BS. I'm sure that could keep on going.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's fun.
sometimes it's simple. It's like I've tried everything except eating an apple and going to bed at a reasonable hour. You know?
I remember hearing the halt, and I'm like, you mean hormones, assholes, losers, and twats? What? Like, that's not it. No,
Yeah,
no,
yours makes more
Arlena.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's cause and effect. That's the cause. And yeah, good times. Let's talk a little bit about how we kind of got here, because it's been so long since I heard your story. I'm not even sure I remember it, but and I do like to play a little game. Um, just a few questions to sort of front load the episode with some resources. But when you first got sober, were there any books that really helped you?
Yeah, hey, this is a great question. And I quit drinking on September 7, 2014. And here we are. I just hit 10 years this last September. Woohoo!
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank
Wow.
you. That was
X-rated, as they say.
something like that. Yeah. And the recovery landscape looked so much different back then,
Yeah.
Arlena. Even at a bar, it was like, oh, duels or bust, and I would have rather busted. And back then it was like AA or bust. And I still love AA. I went to, a bit, I still go to meetings. I love AA. Great option. But there
Yeah.
has never been more options for recovery than
Yeah.
there are today.
Yeah.
So there was a book on January 1st, 2010, with a crushing hangover. After hundreds of promises, I'm never drinking again. I made it to a Barnes and Noble in Northgate, Seattle, a mall, and I pulled a book called Beyond the Influence by Catherine Ketchum off the shelf. And I remember Owl City was playing on a repeat, that band. I love Owl City. It's not a bad thing, but I just remember the songs that were playing, and I was ready. I was ready at the time. And I remember I was reading the book, and I think it was inside of a magazine. So, of course, people couldn't see the cover of a book
Oh,
that I was reading.
you were hiding it?
First, I think, or I was tucked in a corner upstairs in the bookstore where nobody could see me, dripping sweat, withdrawals, and reading a
Seems
book.
legit.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But what I recognize, like when you're ready, it really doesn't matter what book, podcast, or program you're going to, like something's going
Yeah.
to stick because I think when you're ready, you're focusing on the similarities and not the differences. That voice inside the unconscious that comes up with so many reasons of why you can drink. It's going to be different this time, moderation. Like that voice just had its ass colossally kicked for the past decade or whatever. So the voice was like softened enough where I was like, all
Mm.
right, this has got to stop. Um, and that book was fantastic. It was Beyond the Influence by Catherine Ketchum. And I went on a 2.5 year sobriety roll, just mostly off that. I highlighted it. I took notes. I even emailed the author, yada, yada. Just, it was awesome.
Wow.
Science, how to. But again,
Yeah.
like I was ready. And what happened after 2.5 years, Arlena? Um, I was what you would call a dry drunk. Of course, I didn't know what that word meant. If you were to
Mhm.
call me an alcoholic, it'd be like, whoa, pump the brakes. I wasn't quite ready to go there, even though, the last decade of my life,
Easy.
yeah, I was blacking out 7 nights a week, drinking in the morning, like by all definitions, full blown. So what my strategy then was just to not drink. And it worked really well at first because how wonderful the body physically responds when you remove alcohol. It's like, whoa, I don't feel like absolute dog garbage every day of the week. And then mentally, the healing is not long to follow. And so I was feeling great for like the first year and a half. And then I remember the last year got a little lonely, like trying to be
Mhm.
sober in a mostly drunken world and you're not attending AA or you're not investing in an alcohol-free community, eventually, like you're going to get tired of it. And there's a barrage of unconscious and conscious messaging that hits us at all days. I've read that's like at least 50 times a day, you see an advertisement for alcohol, TV, Instagram, it's just there. That
Yeah.
number seems high to me, but I've read that stat a couple times. So after 2.5 years, I went to an AA meeting to support a friend. Like it wasn't even for me.
Of course.
Yeah, asking for a friend. And in that interview, since my friend was new and struggling with alcohol, it ended up being a first step meeting. And those usually turn into drunkalogs.
Mm.
And I heard stories in the meeting of people who had gone to prison, multiple DUIs, lost families, job divorces. Somebody had killed a person in that room, had done a long time in prison. And there was this part of me that was like, whoa, none of this shit has happened to me. Keyword yet. There's no way I can have a drinking problem. And I was drunk, I think 2 nights later, I drank all the alcohol in my house, including my roommate's bottle of champagne from his wedding that he was saving as a memento. My bad, Nate.
Oh,
And
oh,
we're still buddies today. And then at like 2:30 in the morning, when you can't buy alcohol from the gas stations anymore, I was Googling if I could drink rubbing alcohol or hydrogen peroxide to keep the party going. And thankfully I didn't. Like Google was very clear, like, yeah, don't drink this. This will F you up. And the next day I woke up, it's like, holy shit, what happened? Like I was on the right path. Like, oh, what the hell happened? I thought I was going to get right back into it, Arlena, but it was a couple years of drinking,
oh.
relapsing day one, and then 2014 got fairly grim. So DUI on the way to work that summer, a lot of those yets that I previously mentioned, you
On the
know,
way to work.
yeah, on the way to work. Yeah, but luckily at the end of that year on September 6th, I had my last drink. In fact, I dumped it out. It was half of a drink. And I just knew there was a knowing if I continued with that drink, I probably would never get back on it. And I dumped it out and I left a camping trip where all my boys were. It sucked. It was not fun, but I knew what I had to do.
Yeah. And what did you do right after that?
I went home. I went home and lived to see another day, right? Because I knew
Yeah.
if I stayed on that camping trip, what would happen that night, the next night, the following night, and probably the remainder of my life, which would have been short after that.
Yeah.
It would have been suicide. It would have a drunken driving accident. It would have been there was chaos at the end, and it's a very similar response to a lot of people at the end. I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired. I could see the body was almost manifesting ways to speed the process up to get me off the planet. Um, yeah, I was walking outside and there'd be dents in my car. It was the end was near. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think if you do roll with this long enough, It's almost like a grim phrase. You're either locked up, covered up, or sobered up. And I was getting to the point where like, wow, I'm not far from any of these right now. Like, which one is it going to be?
Yeah. And so did you go back to the 12 step meetings or what did you decide? How did you get sober again?
Yeah. Um, and previously before that, about 6 days before my last drink, I was DJing a wedding drunk. I used to be a wedding DJ, best job ever. So fun, a lot of cake. But I was covering up one eye while the bride and groom were walking down the aisle so I could see my computer screen so I could pick the right song. And I did. There's three songs for the wedding ceremony. I got it right. But I remember in the ceremony, I took I drove to the wedding drunk. I had a broken tail light. I'd gotten a DUI about a month before, and I'd spent the night in a suicide jail-proof jail cell. So there's like chaos ensuing. Um, yeah. And I remembered at that ceremony during cocktail hour, I had four glasses of wine. I just kept taking them off the server's plate when they walked by. And I was already tanked. And there was this knowing inside of me, Arlena, that's like, Paul, you're not going to finish this wedding. Like, you're going to ruin this wedding and your life. You have to do something right now. And the universe was also on board with that plan. I had a DJ company, so I had several DJs, and one of my DJs had just finished a nonprofit event, like right down the road. So he came up, filled in for me. I had a friend drove an hour to pick me up at the venue, drove home, and I just lost it in the car. Like I fully surrendered, made the decision, like I'm going to rehab. And I called, no one was picking up the phone at that time of the night. And then the next morning, Arlena, I remember I woke up and I heard the birds for the first time in so long out the window. As I heard the birds, and my parents called me back and they're like, "Hey, it's 78 missed calls. You okay there, buddy?" And it's like, "Hey, I might need to go to rehab, but let me sit on this for a day or two." And I was sober for I think 4 or 5 days, and then I mentioned that following weekend at a camping trip, I had a half of a beer, dumped it out, but I was ready. Like there was a window of clarity. I knew full vision of what was going to go down if I kept going down that path. So to answer your question, I did. I went to AA. I did everything they said. Got a sponsor. Went to 90 meetings in 90 days. Said all my predispositions about the program. Yeah, I'm the smartest guy in every room I go into. It sucks. I'm kidding and not kidding. Um, and I just went for it. I did it. And then
Mhm.
another part of that, about 2 months in, I am a big fan of podcasts. I was outside of an AA meeting about 2 months, hiding behind a pine tree. And the voice, thank you, Stigma, and the voice of like, you know what, you got this. Was it really that bad? Was chirping loud. And thankfully, a bigger voice said, Paul, you're going into that meeting and you have to do more. And that was the idea of when a podcast showed up. Because there was also this realization of like, this is bullshit. I'm standing behind a pine tree because of a stigma about what people think if they'll see me. Yet so many people struggle with alcohol.
Yeah.
So many people. It's like, this is BS that it's so secretive, that it's so hush hush. So I'm going to create a podcast about sobriety to create accountability, which I selfishly
Mhm.
did. And if people listen along the way, then that's great. But I didn't really care who listened. And I just rolled with it. I made it a commitment for 52 episodes. I'm really happy I did. There were no sponsors the first year or two. Um, stats show I should have crashed and burned in front of a public audience, and there is still time for that. But
10 years later.
I mean, yeah, not to say like I'm on eggshells like any day, but I don't want to look in the future when it comes to sobriety. I've made that mistake before.
Yeah.
But the accountability worked. It did. It did. And AA worked. And the support of friends worked. And
Yeah.
me burning the ships in that format really worked. Like I couldn't unhave those conversations. And even going back a bit more, when I burned the ships, Arlena, to my parents, my brother, and my best friends, there's no coincidence that my sobriety date landed shortly after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just me getting fully honest with myself, others, and putting things into the universe that were different than drinking. Like I'm trying to create a different reality in the quantum field, as they say, that
Yeah.
doesn't involve a shit ton of alcohol.
Yeah.
Um, and the universe responded. Was it easy? You know, of
Yeah.
course not, but here we are.
Yeah, 10 years later. That's amazing. Now, I remember when we first talked, you were talking about how early it was in sobriety that you started a podcast. And I just thought that that was really brave. And I really appreciate the act of service, right? That's ultimately what it is. And I was sort of indoctrinated into this idea of, I was a little confused about like some of the traditions about maintaining my anonymity. And and so it took me a minute to come to the conclusion to do the podcast. Like you came to it much quicker than I did. And I think there is such magic in sharing the beginning part of the journey because that's what really people resonate with. Do you feel that after 10 years of sobriety, people still connect with your story in the same way, or do you feel like it's changed a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. And I was either brave or stupid to launch a podcast, with 6 months of sobriety. In the AA thing, yeah, I went through that too with the anonymity, and I've had a lot of flack from people in AA, but I've also had a
Have
lot of,
you?
yeah, like over the
Okay.
years, and I've had a lot of love from people in AA.
Yeah.
Um, and it all comes from love. And like the people even that give me flack, and there's a line in As Bill Sees It that's talking about anonymity, and I printed it out. This is like 7 years ago, and taped it on the wall and basically saying like Bill W would be totally cool with it. Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
anonymity is whatever is said in the meetings has to stay in the meeting. Like it's got to be a safe container. That's the part. But
Yeah.
a lot of Bill W.'s sponsees were out speaking about AA. It doesn't mean you can't talk about your sobriety out loud. If you think about it, like
Right.
how did anybody hear the word of A? Anyways,
There's
love the
commercials. There's AA commercials, which I think are funny.
yeah.
Like
I mean, a lot of it
let's all calm down.
and a lot of those criticisms that I can see now are like fear from their part.
Well, that's it.
And
Yeah.
that's okay. I think uh, people are still listening to the RE podcast. I think my jokes have improved, maybe. I don't know. I think, but it has worked. It's been downloaded over, millions and millions and millions, whatever, a bunch of times. And it's worked because I think people can sift through bullshit pretty quick. Like
Yeah.
if people have asked me, "Hey, how do you start a podcast?" And if the motivation is for money, then that's not going to work in the long run. And nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that. But I think it has worked. We do have, because the motivation is still there. I get emails all the time about people are struggling. There's a motivation that puts me behind the mic to help. I think our species is struggling today
Hmm.
and in this day and age, like no other. And I'm not like getting on this pedestal. It's like in my day. But there's a lot of data and facts that human beings are struggling.
Yeah.
We're in a period of de-evolution, at least in America, where the life expectancy is dropping. Addictions are going up, autoimmune disorders, cancers, inflammations, anxiety, depression. Like this stuff is skyrocketing, and it's not separate from addiction. None of it is separate. And so there's a part of me that wants to help. And this is how I know how to help. I think the universe, some call it God, has given me a voice and a way to articulate words that land with people. We have seen peaks and valleys with downloads, and some days I'm cool and some days I'm not. Like sometimes I have no idea how to crack Instagram. I'm like, what am I
Me too.
doing here? I just want to give
Me
up on
either.
it.
I hate Instagram.
Yeah, but it's cool. Like when I can zoom out, Arlena, and I'm not caught in my own fears and my own anxieties. I'm like, holy shit, I'm making a living with my voice, helping other people quit drinking. I'm flying to Vietnam in less than 60 days or right around that mark for a sober travel trip to Vietnam. We've done three to Costa Rica. We're going to Peru again for the second time next October. I teach a dry January course. I've taught a sober ukulele course 3 times, and we're doing an alcohol-free songwriting course. We're going to be doing a ukulele course in Costa Rica, or an alcohol-free songwriting course. So like it's neat. I the phrase like you want to pinch yourself again. I still struggle with things, and like I'm in the world of lack at times, but there are also times where I can see the abundance and deepen with the line of if you ask, you will receive. Just ask it. What
Yeah.
you seek is seeking you. And up until this moment, Arlena, like I've everything has worked out just fine.
Everything's fine. Yeah, it's funny how that works. Um, so you have been doing things what I would consider to be like what's the right word? Like I don't like extracurricular. you, I feel like I've never been somebody that only did one path of recovery. Like I'm greedy that way. Like once I got sober, my mind opened up to this whole new world that was available to me. Right. And I have always worked with people that are struggling with a variety of different things. I think one of the reasons why addiction is so complicated is because there's so many factors to it. But we also have like tons of tools now that we didn't have like back when we got sober a long time ago, right? So, what are some of the things, like I know you do retreats, what other things do you do that are sort of ancillary or can act in conjunction with traditional methods?
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, great question. As I mentioned, for when in 2014, the recovery landscape was much different.
Yeah.
And for about 80 plus years before that, if my math is correct, a lot of it took place in church basements with bad coffee and shitty donuts. And I love all that stuff. I still go
Yeah.
to church basements, not knocking it at all. But there's so much more going down, and things are even being more legalized. And I think things are also going back to a more natural route. So here, the big hitters here are honesty with the self and honesty with others. And the top of the big hitter is connection. This is community. This is with other human beings. And addiction, which is crazy to think is a modern phenomenon. Dr. Gabor Mate turned me on that idea in the realm of hungry ghosts. I remember reading that addiction. Sure, there's like references in the Bible, and it's gone down forever. But the way we see it today is a total modern phenomenon. Like 400 years ago, people didn't struggle with addictions like we do today. There's so
Mm.
many reasons for that. But it comes down to our lack of connection to our fellow human being. Like we don't know where our food comes from. Most of us can't even see the stars at night due to light pollution. A lot of us don't touch planet Earth with the soles of our feet, covered in rubber the whole time. So that list of like the disconnecting forces goes on and on and on. Um, and I think earlier you said the word extracurriculars. I'm not too sure if you're hinting at psychedelics, but I try to remain open if there's new data in science. And I've been open in my own podcast, Recovery Elevator, about my use of ayahuasca, and I've done it more than once. And here's a neat thing with ayahuasca and other psychedelics is the last time I did ayahuasca was years ago. And I was worried about going into that. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to develop an addiction to something else? That has not been the case. My experiences have mirrored other experiences and what researchers are doing with these things. And they're very powerful technologies that aren't new. Pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer didn't create the molecule DMT. This is stuff that is found naturally in nature. And in fact, it's endogenously created in our body. Then breath work. Holy shit, breath work, which can release the chemical DMT in the body, is so powerful. And we do breath work at all of our retreats. And people are visited by dead past relatives all the time. Like the amount of healing that takes place with just getting a bunch of people in a group together and breathing and accessing our own lung capacity and oxygenating ourselves. It's wild. But
Are you
I am,
speaking of like a holotropic breath work?
yeah, there's so many
Yeah.
these days, like clarity breath work, I think is the one that we use at our events, but holotropic is another one. Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
sort of like hyperventilating, sort of
Yeah, yeah,
to be oversimplified.
for
But yeah.
sure.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to say when I said extracurricular, I hope I didn't come across in like a condescending, demeaning way. I just didn't find the right word. But there are I feel like our tool set has expanded, and I wasn't necessarily hinting at psychedelics, although I have done a ton of research. And I just want to share a quick story with you. My oldest son, and I'm allowed to tell the story. He was having suicidal depression when he was in high school, and we got him some medication and we got him therapy, and he's been stable ever since. But it was a little over a year ago that he had sort of a depressive episode, for lack of a better word. And so I had been having all these people on the podcast that had been talking about psychedelic assisted therapies. And so I called somebody up that I knew from the podcast. and was like, "Hey, my boy's in trouble. I need you to help me." And so I sent him away, and he did a series. He did the heroic dose of psilocybin. So it was 5 grams of psilocybin, with a day of rest, another day of 5 grams, a day of rest, and then another 5 grams. So it's the same protocol that they were doing clinical trials with at Johns Hopkins, and there were some other clinical trials going on, but that was the protocol that they had been following. And can I tell you, he came home, and I was tempted to say he came home a different person, but really what happened, Paul, is he came home himself.
Mm.
He came home in himself in a way that he had never been, like in alignment with like his thoughts, actions, and beliefs were all in alignment. And he was like at peace, and he has not been on medication ever since.
Wow. What a
Yeah.
cool story. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that. You know, in
Yeah.
the high altitude mountaintops outside of Oaxaca, Mexico, the prophecy said that when human beings are out of balance, these medicines, the mushrooms will emerge again. And that was like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where the white man, whatever, a gringo traveled down there and kind of brought the
Yeah.
mushroom back to the
From
world.
Maria.
Maria Sabina.
Thank you, Maria Sabina. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the history of that is incredible. There's a book, How to Change Your Brain by Michael Pollan.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and there's data here, like the brain
Hard
scans
science. Hard
pre
science.
pre and post. It was illegal for so long to study this shit, which is super effing lame, like conspiracy
So
theory
lame.
galore going
Yeah.
on right there. Yeah, and I really researched and did a deep dive with that stuff. But I'm still back to the big hitters right now, like connection. I play the
Yeah.
ukulele, I play guitar. Um, I had,
Creativity.
yeah, music, nature, and I would never recommend doing any of those things just solo because there's absolutely a beautiful practice that's gone on for thousands of years called shamanism. And
Mm-hmm.
to do it in the right setting, place, and have a guide, it's incredible. If you feel called for it,
Certain setting.
yeah. But I've also met several people that have kicked major ass in sobriety and they've never touched a psychedelic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's not necessary, but it is a tool. It's contraindicated, for some people. I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet, as do you. These are just different options for different forms of healing. And I think it's important that we stay open. And even, some people that are 12-step oriented, I would argue that, it's important to read the literature, because there's actually a pamphlet on medications. Because people 30 years ago, people freaked out over Prozac. They said if you were taking Prozac, you weren't sober. Right. And so we've come a long way, but it's like we're almost full circle again with psychedelic assisted therapies, where, there's this, you don't take nothing no matter what sort of mentality. But I think if you check your motives and you do it in the set and setting that is indicated, that it can be a powerful tool.
interesting about Prozac, there was an ex-psychiatrist from the University of Harvard who wrote a book called Anatomy of the Epidemic that said, since the introduction of Prozac in 1988, why are there more people on medical disability for depression than there have ever been? And he's going and he makes the point like, hey guys,
Yeah.
these aren't doing shit. Yeah,
No,
crazy.
it's like a safety net more than a boost sort of a
Yeah.
thing.
Part of
Um,
the flack from the 12-step program is they don't know their history. And I'm not saying this to knock Bill W. I have so much respect for the program. Oh my gosh, I
Same.
absolutely love it. But he did belladonna in 1934, which is a plant-based alkaloid, similar to DMT, which gives you a psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
Homeboy has a spiritual experience, sees the light, and then creates the 12 steps of AA. And then go to the 50s when Bill W. is struggling with depression. He frequently visited clinics in Canada that did LSD treatment, which is
Yeah.
another plant-based, naturally occurring alkaloid in nature. It's
Yeah.
it's the street word is acid, right? But
Yeah.
it's still a natural compound that pharmacies cannot patent. And he actually tried to make LSD part of the program,
Yes. Yeah.
which the board said no. And I think that's the right move. But Arlena, there have been a
Yeah.
lot of times where I've played this scenario, like role playing in my head. If someone's like, well, you're not sober, you're doing ayahuasca. And I'm like, well, what would you tell Bill Duff? And that's never
Yeah.
happened. Um, And a lot of people in AA have been very supportive of this just
Yeah.
because they know how hard it is to quit drinking. Like, why would you,
Yeah.
if there's a potentially helpful resource, like,
Yeah.
why would you take it off the table when the founding member of AA also found it helpful? But it's all
Exactly.
good. Yeah, I'm in a
It's
really good
all
spot
good.
with it. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Same. Yeah. Open to all things in its own time. Um, what do you think? What should we talk about next? Because there's like I'm looking at you and I'm like, wow, Paula like has seen a lot. You've traveled, you've, you know, cobbled all these like I feel like the new, I don't want to call it new sobriety because it's always recycled ancient wisdom, right? Like the landscape of sobriety is a little bit different today. Do you still see value in doing the 12 steps, or because I know a lot of people get sober through social media type sobriety. There's a lot of like sober Instagram accounts and things like that. And people, I think what's cool is that people are picking up on the different components like connection. They learn prayer and meditation. They learn all these different, and they do it in their own environment. Do you still see value in doing the 12 steps?
Yeah, there's a lot of phrases, and one of them is take what you want and leave the rest. There's some stuff I hear it, I'm like, but I also don't want
What do
to.
you cringe at?
Uh, Part of it is a bit cultish, but it's also not a bad thing at all, right? If the side effects of your cult are, sobriety and choosing peace over being right, then like I'm cool with that. But sometimes, yeah, I'm not a fan when like a sexual offender gets court ordered to AA and they're not there for a drinking problem. But
Right.
that's just is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I don't think AA is going anywhere. I attend probably 3 to 4 meetings per month, and I view it as community. I have friends that go
Yeah.
there. It's really fun.
Yeah.
There's laughter. Like what we're all
Yeah.
seeking a safe place to be authentic, and we can share whatever we're feeling. Like, dude, that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. And a lot of other sober places, and there's options online as well. I will share. Um, I had a retreat in 2017, and we had a guest speaker there, and we were in the line for lunch just having a conversation with him. And he's like, you know what? He was 15 years sober at the time. And he's like, you know what? Years 5 to 10, I think were the hardest. And I was there with like year 2. And I just wanted to bitch slap this guy. Be like, are you effing kidding me? Like, what are you talking about, man?
What are you talking about?
Way to take all the wind out of my sails. And,
What
and
was
I,
the point of that?
like I kept in touch with him and I spoke with him last year and yeah, he wrote The Painting and the Piano, which is one of my favorite recovery memoirs. But
Really?
yeah, and I get it. I understand what he was talking about because the years 5 for 10 for me, I went through a similar experience because it was almost like fine tuning. And I'm not like a well-crafted oil machine right now, still a work in progress. But the first several years away from alcohol were like the foundational shit. It was just like,
Hmm.
man, just don't drink today. That was it.
Yeah.
And then years 5 to 10, we're like, all right, man, we got to go back into the world. Not saying it took me 5 years to get there, but it was the fine tuning stuff. It was taking the gaze inward and building awareness. As I mentioned, I got married, and I had my first child, and those are results of doing the fine tuning, like not listening to the voices that someone's wrong. It could be me. Um, and I understand where those were the most challenging years for that gentleman as well, because in the healing process, things arrive when they're supposed to be dealt with, and it's almost a triage with our healing. You're not going to like go to your deepest childhood insecurities your first month of sobriety because physically, like your body's recuperating. It's just, I don't think it's the right time or the body's not ready for it. So, what I found year 5 to 10 was like, well, all right, now we're dealing with this. Now we're dealing with shame. Now we're dealing with being judgmental towards the self and others. All right, that's what's up next. Here we go. As I mentioned, like we're still in the human form, still doing it. But and it wasn't like once I hit 10 years on September 7th, like everything went away. But I understand the thinking with that. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like if given enough time that you're able to assume different responsibilities, right? Like I was able to assume responsibilities of motherhood between 5 and 10, right? So not unlike you. I became a mom, I'd gotten married, and that adds like a whole nother layer of complexity. I remember hearing like a Marianne Williamson cassette tape. She liked to lecture on the Course in Miracles back then. And she was talking about the purpose of marriage. And the purpose of marriage is that two people commit to allowing all their stuff to come up so that it could be processed to resolution. It wasn't unlike, spiritual detox, right? All the stuff from your childhood arises in an intimate relationship and you're safe because, where you're committed to the other person's committed to not leaving, like you're committed to
Mm.
not leaving. And I found that to be true. And then the other part of, you know, as you go down the sober road, and you're assuming more responsibilities, it does change you and how you relate to the world. We assumed like um more responsibility in our careers, more financial things, a financial abundance, or more friends. And it just seems like with more, it added a level of pressure or complexity that brought up different things in me that I just was not able to access because I didn't have access to responsibility. If that makes sense. And so, it's just interesting how, given enough time, we gain all this responsibility, and yeah, it challenges us in different ways, deeper ways.
Yeah, I track with that. And I think part of the years 5 to 10, where we're like, all right, we're going to go out in the world and do what we want to do. We're going to go after our goals. I mentioned I purchased a property in Costa Rica, married a kid. And
Yeah.
with that, our capacity to hold is much bigger. Our capacity to be responsible and what
Yeah.
we're allowed to hold on our shoulders is way bigger. Yeah, because our life was shrinking.
Yeah.
The first year, it's still like pretty small.
Yeah. Yeah. People are a little wary of you in the very
Hmm.
beginning. You don't want to get what's that saying? You don't want to get too close to a drowning man. You
Yeah,
might
it sounds
drown
about
one.
right.
Just to future pace for you a little bit, when your kids get to the age that you were when you started having issues, like I don't know if you have childhood trauma, but when I did have some, and when my children became the age that I was when I experienced some deep pain as a child, that was a trip too. Like how
Wow.
you respond is like I learned that overprotective mothers were underprotected daughters.
Hmm. Yeah, you
So
rebound on the other side, out of balance. Yeah,
yeah, total helicopter parent. Our kids didn't spend the night at anybody's houses and things like that. Like we were very like super protective of our kids because we
sure.
were so vulnerable.
Any advice?
One day at a time. Be gentle with yourself, as you practice. Listen, you have a practice of self-reflection. So I just know that shit's gonna come up. And as it arises, you will just naturally, because you've been doing this work for so long, you will naturally reach for the tools that will help you evolve. And these, moments of pain that arise, those are gifts, right? These are opportunities to heal on that deeper level. Like you will literally see yourself in your
Hmm.
kids.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited for all of it
Yeah,
and
for all of
scared.
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is scary
and
because
scared without a doubt.
the stakes are high. And I think that, that's one of the things about 12 step is that, maybe there's a little, well, there's a lot of fear, maybe a little fear mongering to some extent, but, the stakes are high. No matter how far down the road you go, you're still the same distance from the ditch. Like I can really appreciate that. Like the consequences for us not doing our work are pretty severe, but that's a gift. Like I'm very clear about where my boundaries are. I'm very clear about what I need to do to take care of myself so that I don't stray off the road. It's a gift.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Didn't really think about that in the future. Yeah.
Just to prep you a little.
All right.
It's gonna be good. Well,
Yeah.
listen, what kind of stuff? So you have a retreat coming up in Peru. What do you guys do on retreat?
Yeah, we're gonna hike the Inca Trail. We are gonna go to Cusco, check out the Sacred Valley. We're gonna learn a lot about the ancient structures, the Inca culture, and cultures before the Incas. So there's definitely a spirituality component to that trip, but really it's all connection. You get a bunch of people who ditch the drink, And that's like the biggest thing we have in common. The connections happen fast. So looking forward to that. Got an alcohol-free songwriting course that's going to start in February. And this can all be found at recoveryelevator.com. Cafe RE was the private community that branched from Recovery Elevator, and that's now a nonprofit, cafe-re.org. Yeah, great platform. We're off of Facebook now, and I'm really happy with where that community is at. So we'll see where all this goes. Harlina, I try not to get attached to an idea because then also happiness will be attached to that. Like we'll only be cool when this amount of X amount of numbers and this. Really, like at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you're sober. I haven't had a drink in a while, and like we're doing it. We are.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Well, listen, I am so grateful that we got a chance to hang out and catch up. It sounds like you're doing amazing things, and congratulations on 10 years and your little guy. What's his name?
His name's Rio, Rio. Yeah,
Rio.
yeah.
Oh my God, I love that. Boy, I have two boys. Boys are awesome. You're gonna have so much fun.
All right. Well, thank you. Looking forward to it. You too. Yeah, yeah.
And we'll probably talk again in a couple hours.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll see you on my podcast. Looking forward to it, Arlena.
Thanks so much for joining me.
You got it. Thank you.